right, so Tyann and Andy, welcome to Living Off Rentals.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you guys here. This is kind of a special birthday present for me because it's my 40th birthday today. So it's like a digital birthday present to get to interview you guys, especially since you're on opposite sides of the world. So
happy birthday.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So yeah, my wife threw me a surprise party 3 months ago, so I feel like I've kind of eased into it. So just for a little bit of background for our listeners, though, Andy and Tyann have a ton of experience in the short-term rental space. Andy is the co-founder and CEO of TouchStay, and Tyann is the community ambassador at TouchStay. TouchStay is really it's kind of like the digital welcome book company out there when you think about it, it's a super cool concept that I'm really excited to talk about today and get into why that will help you as a short-term rental owner. And I also know you guys have just a ton of experience in vacation rentals in general, so I want to get into that as well. So if you can first kind of fill in a little bit what I left out and kind of share how you got into short-term rentals in the first place and why it was attractive to you.
Oh, okay.
I'll go first. This is the tricky thing about having two of us on.
Yeah.
Well, Kirby, with you sharing how old you are, I've had this funny feeling this year specifically, meeting people and going to events and things like that. When I first started, I felt like the youngest in the room. Back in 2007. I mean, I was 27 years old when I started in the vacation rental industry.
Wow.
I was pregnant with my third kid. And so I am pre-Airbnb. We took payments by check only. We didn't do credit cards, So now, I'm in my 15th year and I'm looking at the room and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm no longer the young one. I'm the old one. That's so wrapping my brain around it because I've always been the youngest in the room and, there's school and everything because I skipped grades and all of that. So long story short, yeah, I've been around for a long time. I am an owner, investor, manager. I have 2 vacation rental property brands, both in Missouri and very different locations, very different types of guests. I love that because I get to experience the different target guests, and then I can relate better to most people from our large up to 10 bedroom, 3-4 generation family properties down at Branson, Table Rock Lake, over to Missouri wine country with the unique historical homes like the bank I bought. So you can legally launder inside my bank, which is quite fun. And I tell guests you can bank on a good time.
Legally launder, nice.
Yeah, the puns are the best. Yeah. And then also my years of speaking at the vacation rental industry conferences since 2013. And then 3.5 years ago, Andy making the amazing move of asking me to consult for TouchStay. And I will toot my horn on that one. And I love it. And, TouchStay is a wonderful family, a team. It's incredible. And it really does help me as an owner, investor, manager to be a rock star to my guest. And what TouchStay does, we treat our clients as the rock stars they are and allow them to be the rock stars for their guest and really enable them with the communications.
Awesome. I would say, like, following up on that, that there isn't a single question that I've heard anyone in this industry ask Tyann to which she's looked blank and didn't have the answer. She literally knows everything.
Good person to have on your team.
Very, very good. It's insane. It's insane having that amount of knowledge. But I probably go back to I don't know, I probably started in this industry indirectly when I was probably 10, or like growing up as a kid, staying in, apartments or cottages that my parents took me to. And I remember in 1995, 6, 7, somewhere, I wasn't 10 then, I'm a bit older than that. But I went to stay in an apartment in Spain by looking in the back of a Sunday newspaper for the advert. I literally found it was like a tiny little, 2 centimeters. It was probably a bit bigger than that, but it was a tiny advert. And those were the days where you did that. Like there was no Airbnb. There was no kind of way to, like, I mean, there were certain niche sites over the web, but the web was so early then. It was like you did everything out of a magazine or a brochure, or in our case, a newspaper. But I loved those days because there was a certain, like, there was a certain sort of sense of adventure that went into, I mean, there was a certain risk as well. Did I just find somewhere in the back of a newspaper that doesn't exist, or but you phone someone in those days, you like got through to someone, and they could have been scamming, but you kind of you use your common sense a bit more. Not to say anything's wrong with it these days. I think it's brilliant, the fact that the industry's progressed, and Airbnb have done a fantastic job of helping businesses like ours because of the brand they've created and the awareness they've created. But it's a little easier to find places now with places like Airbnb than it was back then. But that's one of the reasons why we started Touch Stay, was because we had that kind of experience where you went and stayed somewhere, but you knew nothing about it, you knew nothing about the area, and then you ended up talking to the person who you were renting it from, the host or the manager, and they would tell you everything. They literally had gold nuggets coming out of their brains, just like it was, where's this, where's that, what's the best to do that, where should I, they knew it all. And it just seemed so obvious to create a product like ours that enabled all of that great stuff in the mind to go into a digital app that a guest could then use while they were away on vacation. So that's kind of how my journey started and how I ended up with Touch Stay.
And can you explain a little bit more about what Touch Stay is, so people can kind of envision what you're talking about?
Oh, yeah, we glossed over that bit. Good question. Kind of 101 is to make sure your listeners actually know what you're talking about. So apologies for that.
It kind of is self-explanatory, but I don't think, they can kind of visualize all that goes into it.
Yeah, it's, the way I always describe it is, imagine you turn up at an Airbnb and you had that binder on the coffee table. You pick it up and there's things like how the home works and what the Wi-Fi code is and all that stuff. And there might be some flyers for local restaurants or the kayak tour or the dolphin tour, that might be 6 years old because they haven't been updated, or page 10 of the binder's missing because someone walked off with it, the usual sort of stuff. So it's a digital version of that, but a lot more, because that relied on being in the home to access it. Whereas our product, because it's digital, allows the host or the manager to send it to their guest well in advance of their stay. And that therefore enables all of the questions that would usually come from the guest to kind of disappear. Over 80% of our customers have said that they've saved time using Touch Stay. And that's simply because they can give it to their guest in a really easy format that they can look at on their phone or their tablet or their computer. And then they can get that question, which is, where do I park? I've got kids, where do I rent baby gear from? You can put all of that stuff in the guide and then just cut off those guest questions. And usually it's repetitive guest questions. It's stuff that people have asked, they ask all the time. And those are the best questions to put in there, because those are the ones that stop those questions coming. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what Touch Stay is. But I mean, Tyann, you probably have a different view because you actually use it as well as an operator.
Yeah, I was going to say, on the surface, that's what it is. But the underneath lying underneath all that is the fact that it reinforces me and my company as a brand, and it reinforces the confidence of my guests into us. So we very regularly get messages saying, hey, we are so much looking forward to our stay. We have confidence in that it will be just as good because of all your advanced communication ahead of time. And that way they know we're legit. They've spent their money well. They know they can have an amazing experience. Then they become our loyal private army of word of mouth referrals.
And how does it help your brand, though?
It's completely branded to each host owner manager, each property. So your colors, your logo, the photos, the video, all the visuals. When you write it, you use your brand voice. I mean, I put pictures of us. I put pictures of our team. We talk about the restaurants, of what we order, what we recommend, what time to go. We literally help folks plan their stay in a way that is non-intrusive, but they feel like we're right there with them the entire time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so key. I read somewhere that 70, it was like 70 something percent of people say they use Airbnb because they want the localized experience or the personalized experience of like you're living there, you know? So I think those personal touches are so key. Is you working with, as the community ambassador, you work obviously with a lot of hosts. Are there some that implement this in a specific way, or there's certain tactics to implement it that you see it works much better than others? Is there anything that you recommend if somebody's going to dive into it and start using this?
For sure. There's a lot of people who just throw a link at their guest and think it's going to magically work. It doesn't work that way. And it's one of those things where you tell your guest, and then you tell them again, and then you tell them again, and then you tell them again. And the biggest thing is you have to be able to communicate with your guest in the way they want to be communicated with. Your guests aren't going to do just the way you want. So finding ways to communicate in several different manners. So my touch points from the time of booking to the time of arrival are actually 14 times. And a lot of people think, oh my gosh, that's a lot. Well, it's 14 different ways. It's not 14 emails. It's not 14 text messages. It's different ways, including a physical card that arrives in their mailbox. So
Before they arrive.
Before they arrive.
Wow.
That's right. And then they get one after they arrive. And that's not included in my 14.
Wow. That's amazing.
So it's realizing who your target guest is and looking at your booking window and figuring out, okay, how many times is good to touch them, and then communicating in a way that you relay that this is important information. So I don't just say, here's my digital guidebook. I say, this is where you're going to find the Wi-Fi information. This is where you're going to find the discounted show tickets. This is where you're going to find the traffic tips. This is the grocery delivery service. I give them very specific things that are our top frequently asked questions. And then the guests know that we've already thought ahead of them and we've answered the questions before they come up. And then I time it out. So looking at history of when are they asking these questions? When are they ready for this information? And send it the day before or the day of, so that I'm anticipating instead of reacting.
Yeah, so smart. I talked to a lot of new Airbnb or vacation rental owners, and I tell them, like, I left so much money on the table in the beginning just trying to figure this stuff out. And all the lessons learned that I have are based on poor experiences in the past or repeat questions over and over again, and how much time it took and how much pain it was. And so when I work with new vacation rental owners, those are the things I say, like, pay attention to those recurring things so that you can prevent them in advance, and it saves you so much headache just by heading it off that way. I'm curious. So I've searched through sort of a sea of technology when it comes to apps and tech that will help vacation owners. It seems like every single day there's like a new thing that's popping up to help the management process, from the noise detection to calendar management to pricing optimization to all the stuff that's out there. And so I think when most hosts are considering paying for something that's going to help them manage their property, they're looking at the cost versus how much this is going to return to me based on buying this, as opposed to just, using Airbnb and just renting my property, So what does that typically look like? If you've looked at your TouchStay users, like, what type of return on investment do you typically see on something like this?
It's a great question. And I never used to have the answer to it, honestly. In the early days, it was always very tough to quantify that, because you're right. There is well, I'm going to invest time and money into this. What do I get back from it? What's the point? And it became clear to us particularly during COVID, I would say that the return was in like keeping yourself sane, keeping the questions down, feeling good about providing information to guests, which has a return in the sense that you feel kind of confident and positive that your guests feel equipped. There are so many guests out there that are new to this world, and they struggle with not staying at the hotel that's got the reception desk, and not knowing that this place that I'm going to stay, does it have this hotel car park, or like what, all of those kind of things that exist in traditional forms of accommodation just are out the window with this form of, which is part of the beauty of it, right? That's the great thing about this industry. But that's where the opportunity lies. That's where the return on using something like TouchStay comes in, because of what I said. You are reducing your questions, you are making your guests happier because they feel equipped before they've even arrived. That moment pre-arrival is the most stressful moment for a guest, particularly in this kind of environment. And you take away that, you put them at ease, that then turns into a far better guest experience for them. And guess what? Of course, a much more positive review. So that in itself then has a tangible effect on your following bookings, because clearly you're up the rankings, you have a better credential set. So that's where the ROI is. That there's, and what you do with that time saving. I mean, that's it's not like you haven't pocketed that. It's not like a saving in your back pocket. It's what you do with that time, isn't it? So if you've got a guest services coordinator who you're paying X amount per year, if 25-30% of their time is saved from answering questions, pull their time back or reinvest their time somewhere else. If it's you that's saving time, can you now then work on, well, what are these other parts of my business that I can improve on? Like, should I be strengthening my brand? Should I be figuring out the cadence of guest communications to use, like Tyann's just described? Should I now, with this extra time, go and look at a property management system that I've been thinking about for ages that I just haven't had the bandwidth to do? All these things that free you up. You know what it's like as a business owner when you just get swamped in the detail, like you're working in your business, that phrase of in your business rather than on. That's where I see the return on TouchStay is the ability to kind of step back and work on your business.
Yeah, on top of that, we've got users that come back and say, and they've told us, they said, we send our guidebook out and the guests only booked for 2 nights, but now that they've seen the area and what to do, they've booked another night or 2. So they are literally making more money because of their advanced communication of using the digital guidebook.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, there's probably so many sort of indirect aspects that are, that you get out of this that are difficult to quantitate. But like you said, brand building, so if somebody's a repeat guest that you wouldn't have got otherwise, obviously that's a huge ROI that pays for the whole service. Or if you can get freed up, like Andy said, to buy another vacation rental, like that's massive, if it's freeing up your time. So that makes a lot of sense. And would you say, I think most of my audience is newer to vacation rentals, newer hosts. It's not a lot of like big professional management companies. Would you say that this is ideal for someone who has one property, or is it somebody that once you start to get like 5 or 6 properties, or who is this kind of designed for?
Anybody who wants their sanity. So yes,
wow.
all of it.
That's a big group, I think.
It is a huge group. and then the thing is we're going to get you into our Rockstar group. It's a secret group on Facebook. And at that point, you're going to become addicted, because there's more than just an area guidebook / house manual. There's lead generation guidebooks. There's standard property appearance. There's guidebooks that entire countries use us. There's an island in the Caribbean. There's training manuals, and we have an elevator manual. I mean, it's mind-blowing once you start looking at the use of TouchStay. And yes, it's very addicting.
Yeah, it's a good point. It without wanting to be too jargonous, it's basically a content management system for any kind of information you can dream up. So anything that you previously had to put in a PDF or a Word doc or something, you can put into here and categorize it so that anyone who's reading it, like Tyann said, from the person who's cleaning the home to the wedding party that's arriving to, like she said, we have a company that sells elevators, like a commercial elevator company that's created a guide for each of their elevators, like an operating manual. So all of those things are capable with the system. But I would say, like, on that point about who can use it, we have a share a room Airbnb host, and we have a 1,500 property manager using the platform. So it goes to all of those. And like Tyann said, it also is, we do have a lot of people say they get quite addicted to this idea of, like, because suddenly you've got this tool that you can do so much with. Things like, if you've got a hot tub that your guests continually get wrong because they press the wrong button, like I've been there pressing the wrong button, have a little QR code next to it, or the AC panel, whatever, little QR code, click here to learn how to operate it. Scan your phone on it. It takes you directly to the section in the TouchStay guide where you've got a video of the operation of the hot tub or some written instructions. So it's all of those kind of little bits of versatility that once you get into it, you're like, oh, it does that. It does that. And that's the bit that I think in the ROI question, that's the other bit. Like, you actually enjoy doing something. House manuals were a pain to maintain. Like, suddenly it becomes something quite interesting and fun to do.
That's a great point. As you're talking about QR codes, it kind of it made me think that, like my parents, they're not, I think they're self-admittedly not the most technologically savvy people in the world. I don't know that they know what a QR code is. So how does it mesh with that? Because they use Airbnb quite a bit, but I mean, I think they tend to prefer paper, over like if there was a complicated login or something like that, they'd see that as a negative. So how do you, like, make it friendly to both groups that are tech savvy and non-tech savvy?
I knew you were going to ask this question next. Okay, so there's two things. There's the front end tech and the back end tech. So those of your listeners who would be logging in and back end, it is so friendly. It very, what you see is what you get type of thing. So don't worry, jump in, try the free trial, go for it. For the guest, like I mentioned earlier, I target 3 and 4 generation families in our large homes. So I have all ages, and generally it's grandma, grandpa putting the money down to stay. So they're the ones getting the information from me. The amazing thing about TouchStay, it's a progressive web app, which means all you got to do is send a link. So in my emails and my text messages, it's just a link, and they tap on it and they open it up in any device, any browser, anything, and they're there. It doesn't have to be a QR code. So then when they arrive at the property also, you have the additional ability to have a QR code in place. So for instance, I have a QR code right there in the number 1 spot of the entire house that every single person sees on the refrigerator. And that is next to the Wi-Fi information, the safety information, your emergencies, numbers, your address, and the checkout instructions. And anyone can scan that QR code. 2 years ago, QR codes is like, whatever. But because of COVID, and now you go to a restaurant and there's a QR code on your table, this is your menu. Everybody knows how to use it. And then if they don't know how to use it, there's a link they can type into their phone or tablet, whatever they want to do. But the thing is, it's easy. There's no friction whatsoever to get in. There's nothing to download from the App Store. You access it by a link, and then you get this little pop-up that says, hey, if you want to save to your home screen, this is how you do it. And once they do it, the content actually magically downloads in the background, and now they have an app on their phone without downloading anything.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's funny because we just stayed at a Airbnb, or as a VRBO, as a vacation rental in Amelia Island last weekend for a wedding, and they had a QR code next to the back patio door because it was one of those that you have to lift up on the door to unlock. And so I scanned it, and it was just like a 30-second video, which probably alleviated 50 or 100 questions over the course of a year that they would have had to answer on how do you lock this back door. So I can see there's so many applications for that. So I think for most vacation rental owners, like the mecca is not having to rely on Airbnb eventually, and having your own book of business, which I think comes mostly from repeat guests. That's how it's built. So how does touch stay, I guess, lead to repeat guests? Is there anything afterwards that, are you sending them any follow-up through touch stay, or is there, what's the, because I think that's part of it, right? Is like, it leads to a lot more repeat guests.
I'll answer it first, and then Tyann, I'm sure you'll answer it from your perspective as using it. It was important for us to make sure the app was fully customizable, so you can create whatever content you want in it. You get started with a template, but you can just ditch that template or work with it and add your own stuff. One of the parts of the template is a book again section, and it enables you to once again say something about who you are, your brand, put a link back to your website. You can even, if you want to, include a link to your newsletter sign-up form. You could include a link to a form, which then asks the guests for extra questions that you may want to then use to remarket. Those are the kind of the prime ways that directly inside the app you'd be able to do that kind of thing. But I know Tyann gets kind of crazy and creative and funky with like what she actually does. So maybe the theory of what I've said is like the practical in Tyann.
Yeah, so I do that. I cross promote all my properties as well. Always linking to my socials, to my direct website. I have a shop section where folks can buy swag. And then just the simple fact that it can sit on their phone as an app without being an app, and then helping people to return. So then it's also built into my other messaging as well. So it's all interrelated. So we got to remember that touch stay is a tool, it's a communication tool, and then you got to fit it into what your workflow and processes are.
Got it. That makes sense. Wow, swag shop. That's something I need to look into. That's smart. So, and a lot of people, I kind of want to transition a little bit into just like vacation rental in general, in your perspective, because I know you guys work with tons and tons of hosts. So a lot of people ask me about, the future of vacation rentals, because it seems like every year it's just like evolving and changing so much. And I think this is the thing that holds a lot of people back from getting into it, is that they're like, well, it's great this year, but what if something bad happens next year? I don't know what to expect, or what if the rules change or whatever. So where do you think the industry as a whole is heading long term, and what changes are you guys making, if any, to your businesses, touch stay, and also tie in your vacation rental businesses, to adapt to the changes?
I can talk like from perspective of what I think the industry is going to become. And it's something that it's interesting when you hear people talk about like trying to stargaze, trying to future gaze into what the industry becomes. The reason why people have such a big problem trying to do that is because it's such a fragmented industry. Like I was saying earlier, the front desk at a Hilton does not exist in. It's starting to a little bit. There's some purpose-built real estate that is very branded and has that kind of feel. But it doesn't matter how much is invested into that kind of operation. The vast majority is always going to be individual homes that are quirky, that are different in different locations, managed in different ways. And I think that's the real strength. And I think probably the opportunity here for those who have a small portfolio is huge. I think those who are kind of getting up, 50, 60, 70, I think it's harder and harder in a local market to keep growing your inventory. I think that reaches a ceiling, particularly if you've got competition. But if you're at that smaller level, there's really, really lots of opportunity. And I think that is the really interesting space of our industry, how there's lots of people that take the fragmentation that exists and turn that into an asset, meaning my business of 4 or 5 or 6 boutique places is really, really unique in a certain way, whatever that certain way is. And I think there's a huge opportunity to do that. And Airbnb helps people do that, doesn't it? It's like this, let's face it, the supply of properties to the market is heavily outweighed by the demand. There just simply aren't enough rentals to keep up with it. So you will end up having lots of people coming through Airbnb, and you'll get booked first and you'll get booked for the best prices if you're the one that can clearly articulate how your uniqueness exists in your market. And I think that the fragmentation of the industry really plays into that. The other thing I think might happen is more of a franchise kind of model. I can imagine if you are, like we were talking about earlier, about the struggle of knowing, which tech things to adopt, because there are so many things. Like today there's a different tech and tomorrow there's a different one. Like, which do I use? I think and how do I brand myself and how do I operate and how do I do all these things that Tyann's been doing for years and she knows. It's, if you have a franchise model which allows you to simply adopt a tech stack and a certain standard operating process, leaving you in the local market to be the expert in that market, to define what it is to stay with you, to excel at doing the things that only a local operator can do. Because a property manager sitting in Washington cannot be boots on the ground in Anna Maria and deliver that exceptional experience. And I think that's where a franchise model could be quite interesting. And so I think that might be one trend. But for those who are worried about, there's national chains like Vacasa buying up property management and we're all going to be kind of shrunk out of the market. I mean, like Vacasa are at like what, 30,000 properties or something, there's tons and tons and tons of opportunity in this market. And I don't buy into that at all. I think the opposite is going to happen. Like I said, I think the small players are the ones that are going to win through this game.
I guess
Tyann, what do you think? Huh?
It's the demand's going to grow from a traveler standpoint. And to me, it's just more and more people are discovering this way of accommodations. It's not like it's pushing out the other types of accommodations. It's, oh, here's another way to do it. I mean, I look at myself and I've got 3 teenage boys. I do not want to get hotel rooms and leave my teenagers on their own in hotel rooms. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. I need a bigger place. I need a house. I need to be able to keep an eye on them, but they still need their own space because they're teenage boys. But when it's just my husband and I traveling, we'll go for a hotel, we'll go for a bed and breakfast. So there's all these different types of accommodations. And now the vacation rentals themselves have just skyrocketed within the limelight of, oh, here is another way. I mean, I remember way back a decade ago when HomeAway said only 30% of Americans even knew vacation rentals existed. When I met my husband 5 years ago, he had never even heard of a vacation rental. He was like, what do you do? What is that? You can do what? It's more, and there's more and more new folks coming to stay. And I also think our responsibility as owners, hosts, investors, managers is making sure that we bring online properties that are legal and have the correct insurance and meet the expectations that we advertise. So if you're going to advertise a really crappy place, there's a famous listing in St. Louis where I think it's like $20 a night, but it's literally an empty house. You get no furniture or nothing, but it's 5 stars because they advertised correctly and set the expectations, and the people got what they expected. So, hitting those things, it's going to help people have a better stay, have a better experience when you're legal and everything's in order and you do their expectations. And then you put on your quirk to it. You know who your target is. You can't be everything to everyone. Us as a manager of our 2 brands, we are purposefully small. And like Andy said, we're very careful on what we do. When someone says, hey, we want you to manage for us, they're not just interviewing us, we're interviewing them to make sure it's a good partnership, that their property fits into our brand. But I also ask specifically, have you checked your local regulations? Have you talked to your neighbors? There's all these different things. And I think it is our responsibility as owners, hosts, investors to make sure we do our due diligence to do that.
That's such great points. Yeah, when you're talking about the smaller niche people, really excelling, I agree fully. I think I've seen that so much with a lot of these big players. It's all about scale, and I get it. Like you're sort of like the tech model where you've just got, it's all about like how big can I get, but then the quality falls. Like guests notice that, they notice that the host or their manager who's renting it to them has never stayed in that property, and it's sort of a commodity base, which if 70 something percent are saying they want that personalized, localized experience, and it's just this, sort of hotel, like check the box type thing, I think you're right that's going to hurt those people, and the people who really care about it are going to continue to rise to the top. You also mentioned unique stays. Andy, you talked about, that being one of the key differentiators. Tyann, you mentioned that you bought a bank and turned that into an Airbnb. So I think that would probably fall into a unique stay category. Can you share a little bit about why you thought that was going to be a good idea, and then how it's actually worked out for you since that happened?
Yep. That's the same question I got from all the locals who looked at me like I had two heads because
Nice.
it's in a little tiny town of 1,100 people. The flood of 93 that came through the Midwest just completely devastated the area. It was run down. But what I saw was me as a little girl riding the Katy Trail on my bike and looking at this little farming community and being like, oh, I want to live there one day. And having the local connections of when my friend who said, hey, I know you're looking for a new place to, invest your money. Why don't you come look over here and look at this building next door? And looking then at what's surrounding it that no one has tapped into. I love to look at places that have zero vacation rentals or very, very few. So when I first started down at Table Rock Lake, I was one of 12 properties that slept 12 people or more. Half of those was owned by my family. We're all direct competitors. It makes for fun dinner conversations at holidays, right? So
Stealing gas and stuff. Yeah.
yes, exactly. So now, there's 500 properties that sleep 12 or more after 14 years. But my bank, it's one of those things I look and like, it's sitting directly on the Katy Trail. It's the longest rails to trails in the entire country. It's a tiny, small farming community that's small town America. You have several wedding venues surrounding it, and there's nowhere to stay, or there's just a handful of beds to stay in. You've got the town across the way that already did a study that they're thousands of beds short, and they want a hotel to come build, but the hotels aren't ready to take that risk. So, just looking at the area and what's going on, I saw the need, I saw the vision. I found someone to do my vision, to buy my 30-inch drill bit to go through the vault wall. It was 27 inches thick. So it took about 90 seconds to get through the vault to break in, just so you know.
That's scary.
But it is literally now my laundry room. The look on the Lowe's guys' faces when I said where the washer and dryer went was quite priceless. But investing, I choose a word every year. And that year, my word was invest. I wanted to invest in a community. And by purchasing this property and the one next door and rehabbing them into something that the community could be proud of, I knew I was investing in a community. And what happened is slowly other buildings around it have been spruced up. The folks are putting more pride into their area. The History Channel has called to talk to the mayor about my bank. I mean, it's been 3.5 years, but investing in a community and looking at the potential rather than what is right now makes a huge difference. And actually, you will see the area. If you haven't already, I'll probably be on the news soon. But next door is Augusta, Missouri, which is the very first dedicated wine country in the United States. And the Hoffman family has come in and they've bought up 5 wineries, over 1,000 acres, and they're turning it into the next Napa Valley of the area. So yeah, we've got extra million or so visitors coming in, and I'm ready and waiting.
And I think as well, like, because I've followed Tyann's story just because we're close, but also I see it on Instagram. And she's done an amazing job of identifying what's quirky, but also is what's really appealing. And over the last 18 months, 2 years, we've all had to study what's on our doorstep, like where to go and drive to spend some time, and to try and find out those places that just take us away from home without having to drive that far away, like that feeling of escaping and staying somewhere really interesting. The Bank House has that in spades. And not only that, but she realized it was on the Katy Trail as well. Not realized, obviously she knew it, but that was one of the advantages as well. And like little things like I see you do, Tyann, on your houses is like the little bicycle, because the branding is about the bike trails, and then they have little bicycle things, and catering to bicycle groups and some of the things that you're providing. And that, going back to your point, Kirby, about the unique stays, it's like that Tyann has just typified that, and the demand is there. Like, it's really huge. We all want to go and stay somewhere like that. So yeah, no surprise. And it's Tyann as well, so no surprise it worked.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. How has it worked out for you over the last couple of years?
Oh, phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind sharing numbers if you want me to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I spent $130,000 for the property. That is it. And I got 2 houses. And I spent about $75,000 in rehab. And none of that was cash out of my pocket. So now I have probably close to $500,000 or more in property worth, and I'm grossing $80,000 to $100,000 with 0 cash.
Wow, that's amazing.
This is the tale of all of Tyann's investments. Like, you talked about any of her properties, like the numbers that she's grossing, that it's insane, the returns. It's
well, and cool. It speaks to that point about uniqueness. My wife and I went and stayed in a tent in May, and it's a glamp site that is just a really high end. They just do everything right, like you talked about, Andy, where you just said, like, that it's not just about uniqueness, but it's also about, like, they figured out what people want as well. And we kind of wrote it off as research trip, because we want to do something similar on our acreage here. But, I was like, I would never pay $350 a night to stay in a tent typically. But after staying there, I would go back and do it again, because it was just amazing. And they greet you and drive you to your tent and give you champagne, light your fire. Like, it's just like, they do everything for you that make you feel really special. And so I think this is just another example of that too, because I tell people all the time, you don't need the best house in the area. You need just the most unique house that appeals to your ideal guest. So this is a great example of that. I appreciate you sharing that. Well, I appreciate you guys' time. I think people have a ton of great takeaways. If people want to follow up with either of you, is there a best way to follow up with you, or just go to touchstay.com, or what's the best way?
Definitely touchstay.com, but our email addresses are very simple as well. Andy at Tyann, Tyann at, and you'll find us at Touchstay, by the way, of course. Yeah. Yep, that's cool. Easy. I think we also have social presence. Well, I know we have social presence, but
Tyann, and we have a podcast.
Yes,
we have a podcast.
Oh,
we do. It's called The Guest Cast, and what we do is we interview travelers. We don't want to hear from the owners, hosts, managers and talk in a vacuum. We want to hear from the guest. And we interview guests and their experiences, and then we dig into the why those experiences made such an impact on them. And then Andy and I discuss on how owners, hosts, managers can then apply it to their business.
That could get interesting. Some 1-star stay guests that come on there and share some horror stories and stuff. That'd be really interesting. So it's called what is it called? The Guest?
The Guest Cast.
The Guest Cast. Got it. Cool. I'll check that out. Well, I appreciate both your time, and this has been fun. We'll definitely stay in touch, and maybe have you back on in a couple of years and see, the progression of TouchStay and how many other banks you own at that time, Tyann.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Kirby.
Thank you, Kirby.